Taoiseach, I think the government has become what can only be described as a circular firing squad. Fianna Fáil TDs are blaming Fine Gael for the housing crisis, and Fine Gael TDs are blaming Fianna Fáil. And I'd just like to settle this dispute between the coalition partners, because the fact is that both points of view are correct. Fianna Fáil crashed the housing market the first time round, and Fine Gael then let Vulture funds loose on the carcass for a decade with tax incentives and fast-track planning. And now both parties have joined forces in government and have been destroying the housing market. Taoiseach, 2 weeks ago, my colleague Cian O'Callaghan stood up in this House and told you that 435 apartments in Ashtown, Dublin 15, had been bought in bulk by an investment fund. He expressed concern that an entire generation was being locked out of home ownership and asked you to act immediately to stop funds bulk buying homes. Your response was to accuse him of being ideological and to say that you had no plans to introduce legislation to rein in the investment funds. Fast forward 2 weeks and another global fund has gobbled up more homes, this time 135 homes in Maynooth. During leaders' questions yesterday, the Taoiseach professed surprise about this development. He said it was a new departure and that usually funds confine themselves to hoarding properties in cities, not suburban areas. Does the Taoiseach not think young people in Dublin and other cities deserve to own a home? Does he believe the mass acquisition of homes by funds is somehow okay as long as they restrain their purchases to every new build in Dublin and other urban areas? In any event, the Taoiseach was wrong. These funds have been block buying estates and apartment blocks, and now second-hand homes too, in urban areas and the commuter belt, and they've been doing that for some time. Since 2018, they have spent €4 billion on residential property in this country. Did anyone in government even notice that? Taoiseach, you may not understand the Social Democrats' ideology, but it is really simple. We believe that ordinary workers on average salaries should be able to own their own home. We are not disaster capitalists. We do not want to see young people spend their whole lives paying extortionate rents to cuckoo funds, which pay almost zero, very little tax on their investments. Because that is your ideology, Taoiseach, and that of Fianna Fáil too.
Thank you, Deputy.
Tax loopholes and sweetheart deals for developers and investment funds,
thank you, Deputy.
While ordinary workers and families are sacrificed on the altar of greed and profit, is just not acceptable. Taoiseach, 2 weeks ago you were disinterested in funds hoovering up the country's limited housing supply.
Deputy, we're over time.
Tell us, have you now deigned to care about that? If you have, what are you going to do about it? Because talk is cheap. What action will you take?
Thanks, Deputy. And with the greatest respect to you, I think it's the ideology of everyone in this House that people who work hard, who have a decent income or an average income, or even a lower than average income, should be able to buy their own home. And it is the case that in this country, 65 to 70% of people own their own home, and that wasn't achieved by the Social Democrats. That's been a feature of a long-standing policy by governments led by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But we need to make sure that that is a reality now for people in their 20s and 30s, which it very clearly is not. What I think is ideological and ideologically extreme is the view from some, including, as I understand it, the Social Democrats, that we should have outright bans on some forms of housing and outright bans on some forms of housing investment. And I think that would be a mistake. You would result in less housing as a consequence of that. When you put ideology over practicality, you end up with those kind of results. And if that is your party's policy, well, then I do think that's wrong. But I agree with you that the objective of all parties in this House is to make home ownership a reality for people, and should be a reality for people in their 20s and 30s, as it has been for generations that came before. As regards the housing crisis, the responsibility for dealing with it lies with the government now. It doesn't matter about the past, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens in government together have to work together to solve this crisis. I think on areas like homelessness we're making good progress. Numbers of people in homelessness still too high but falling, and falling for quite some time now. And that's largely down to the Housing First policy initiated by Minister Coveney and then brought through by Minister Murphy during his time. On social housing, we've seen a substantial increase in the amount of social housing built in recent years in Ireland, as few as 6,000 in 2016, up to 6,000 in 2019, hit obviously by the impact of the pandemic since then, but heading for that target of 12,000 social houses provided per year. And our large proportion of housing now being built in Ireland every year is being built by the state. I don't remember the last time such a proportion, such a percentage of social housing relative to the total amount of housing being built was that way. And that often goes without comment, that so much of the housing now being built in Ireland is social housing, maybe as much as half of it. And I think that's something that the Deputy refuses to acknowledge. In relation to investment funds, they have a role. It's an appropriate role, and that role is to finance developments that might not otherwise happen, therefore providing supply that otherwise will be lost. People trying to build homes at the moment, developers, construction companies, find it hard to get finance to build developments, particularly high density and apartment developments, and that's where investment funds may have a role to play. But I think we all agree that coming in, as was the case in Maynooth, as was the case in Hollystown, buying a substantially complete estate, therefore making it impossible for first-time buyers or upgraders or the local authority or affordable housing bodies to do so is the wrong approach, and that's what we seek to change.
Thank you. Deputy Roisin, Chair.
I suppose, Taoiseach, the extraordinary thing is that you didn't seem to be aware of this happening right under your nose, and 2 weeks ago you denied that it was the case and that any action was needed. And yesterday, you know, the Taoiseach seemed to be taken by surprise about this. Taoiseach, this evening the Dáil will debate the second stage of the Social Democrats' bill to help end the practice of the state entering into long-term leasing deals with developers and institutional investors instead of building and purchasing social and affordable homes. So this is what is happening. And again, the Taoiseach seemed to be unaware of this yesterday. We're doing this evening in relation to this bill because, unlike the government, we recognise there is a serious problem which urgently needs to be addressed. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael thought the people would be thrilled when they published their affordable housing bill and saw €450,000 as the price of an affordable house. You're so out of touch, Taoiseach, or Taoiseach, I beg your pardon, Taoiseach, if you think that that's the case. 450,000 for a house.
Thank you, Deputy.
Or 500,000 for an apartment. That is not an affordable price by any means. Taoiseach, the Taoiseach told us yesterday that he was going to take action on this. Taoiseach, I'm asking you to spell out, will you support our bill tonight by introducing its measures as a matter of urgency, not simply paying lip service to it?
Thanks, Deputy. I may be incorrect, but I think that bill relates to a different matter, relates to the leasing of properties for social housing, and that is a different matter. And as I understand it, the government is not opposing that, but it is a separate matter, and I think it's wrong to conflate the two. And I think as well, it's a bit misleading what the Deputy said about affordable housing. You know, the average property, the average home in Ireland changed hands last year for about 270,000, and we would envisage that the vast majority of affordable housing scheme properties that are provided will be in and around that figure or lower. But there are certain parts of the country where house prices are very high, and the false impression, again, the misrepresentation, always the tactic of the Deputy, is to kind of make out that all of the affordable housing scheme housing apartments are going to be 400,000. That's not the case at all. Most will be a lot less than that.